All right, welcome everybody to today's game in the Flesh and Blood Competitive Team League. This is week 5 between the Hyperloops and the hometown TCG Ascent team. On the right over here, we have Joe Cullen from the Hyperloops, and on the left is Nick Bova from HTTCG Ascent. This is Andy Modell, like usual. Today I am joined by Larry Johnson once again.
Hey, Andy, how are you doing tonight?
I'm well, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm very excited for this matchup. This is one I don't think I've ever seen played before.
Yeah, here we have Bravo Showstopper with Nick and Levia Shadowborn Abomination with Joe. Certainly not decks that we've seen at the top competitive tables very recently.
Definitely not. I mean, Levi has always been a deck that's always seemed like it's always been missing a piece or two just to be super, be that tier level deck. And maybe Joe's cracked a code on Levi here.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I saw him practicing it a bit earlier, so making sure he's got all those moves ready. Maybe this is going to be his solution to the new post-ban world.
And it's definitely interesting in a world that we think we're going to see a lot of Guardian and Prism. Leviathan does pretty well into both of those heroes. Just having the access to intimidate and be able to go wide naturally with the claws, it can be a pretty strong deck.
Yeah, on the other hand, Bravo Showstopper is a deck that last week we saw Cody Williams was playing a Bolton Sabres against a Bravo Showstopper, and the Bravo ended up besting him. That was the Hyperloop's only loss last week, I believe. So we'll see how this ends up going. Certainly not as meta-relevant as Bravo Star of the Show, but still packed full of power.
Yeah, I mean, Bravo Showstopper is a classic hero. It's probably one of the heroes I personally play the most of. Very true to Flesh and Blood. It always going to play a fair game. You're not going to see anything too crazy out of a Showstopper deck, but it's a consistent deck that can push a lot of consistent damage over the course of a game.
Yeah, so a lot of us haven't been seeing Levia, certainly not in these Team League games. What sort of strategies would you expect to see out of a Levia deck right now?
So, from what I've seen, the Levi can actually play. There's really kind of 3 different Levi decks that are floating around out there. The one is a Claws build, and that's probably the one people are most familiar with. The idea of just throwing a lot of big blood debt turns, really using those high-powered Levi cards and try to kill your opponent as quickly as possible. But there's also more of a control shell of Levi that uses the Romping Club just to kind of do the same thing that the Showstopper is doing, with a little bit of a stronger endgame finisher. So you spend the entire game stacking your graveyard up, and then you run a minimal amount of blood debt cards, and then your end game is just throwing off a lot of blood debt without having to worry about that blood debt damage that often kills Leviathan. And then the third deck is basically it's a hybrid version of both of them. I think there was a hybrid deck that saw pretty good success over in I believe over in Taiwan or Hong Kong during their RTN season. So there's definitely a lot of ways you can go with Leviathan. So there's no real solid deck people are choosing to run with it.
Yeah, now Levia's main weak point is part of her strength is that she has to have a lot of cards going into her banish zone each turn to get that blood debt prevented. Now, do you think that up against a hero like Bravo, who can potentially do a lot of fatiguing, is that going to be a problem for Levia? Or is it mainly just as long as Levia can do her thing, she can usually push damage over and not have too much trouble there?
I definitely think in this matchup, Showstopper is favored in the sense that really the Showstopper can just push consistent damage, make Levi play on short card hands, and then try to get Levi in a spot where it could die to its own blood debt, assuming Joe's on the Claws build. But again, with Levi, the amount of raw damage they can push, if they catch Bravo in a position to overwhelm his defenses, he could chip damage throughout the game and have a pretty big turn in the end and maybe close it out.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to see how this one ends up going. I'm really excited to see Joe playing Levia. Never seen that before myself outside of just knowing that was happening in the practices earlier. And this is bound to be a fun match. Right now, this is a best of 5 series. The HTTG Ascent team is up 2 wins to 1. So if Joe loses this, then it's going to go over to the HTTG Ascent team for this week's win. However, as both teams are currently 4-0 in the league, they will be facing each other again in the finals next week.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic way. I mean, both teams could be trying to conceal some information here, knowing they're going to each other and likely facing each other next week. We could see some gamesmanship going on by both teams here.
Yeah, you never know. People might want to keep their decks hidden for New Jersey, people still figuring that out, just trying to play something for some fun. Or maybe they just want to gain some experience with heroes they wouldn't normally be using. It looks like the players are revealing their equipment and weapons. They've rolled to see who goes first, so this game is going to get started.
And it looks like Joe was on the claws build. So, I mean, probably running the claws into a control deck is definitely a good position to be. A lot of times, Levi will have access to both the Romping Club and the clubs in the sideboard. So, definitely trying to go with the Mandible Claw and spread out damage throughout the course of the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we see Bravo over on his classic Anthos. I don't think you're going to be running the Sledge Vanvilheim into Levi at all.
No. I think that you're going to be definitely using that. You're going to be blocking with some cards this game, so the Sledge isn't as strong when you're blocking as much.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, over here we see that new heave mechanic coming in. So a red Thunderquake, which is going to deal 10 next turn if it goes through, and Nick will have 4 Seismic Surges in total after that. Very powerful way to set up at the beginning.
Yeah, and really that's a great turn 1 for Bravo. You're not allowing your opponent to filter any kind of cards. You're able just to kind of generate a massive attack that's coming to your opponent. I mean, 10 damage is nothing to scoff at on turn 2.
Yeah, on the other hand, Joe just rolled Scabskin Letters right and early to get himself an extra action point. That 5 roll gives him 2 action points total, and one of them is going to that Tome of Fiendal, giving him some cards back, as well as a little bit of a life... no life advantage, because it came out of hand.
And Tome of Fiendal is a great card in Levi deck. I mean, or any kind of brute deck, in the sense that you're gaining action points throughout the course of the game. So if you get to a point that you have that card in Arsenal, that can easily be a great way to get some tempo on a turn, and also just to refill your hand and your graveyard for Levi specifically.
Yeah, Levi definitely likes to see cards in the graveyard because so many of her cards require moving 3 cards at a time from the graveyard into the banish zone. So if the opponent can prevent you from getting those cards in the graveyard, you're often out of options. So something like this that'll just, put another card over there, non-attack action, on top of the claws attack, likely useful. Over here, we do see Nick taking that claw attack for 3, so keeping that full hand, 4 Seismic Surge tokens, 10 damage Thunderquake in the arsenal. This is probably going to be a significant turn coming at Leviah.
Yeah, and 3 damage for the course of the game over a Bravo player isn't something they're really going to sweat. And being able to have that Bravo activation is at the ready is going to be pretty tough for Levi to overcome, at least this turn.
Yeah, so Bravo giving this attack Dominate, Thunderquake coming in now for 10 damage, and Dominate. Joe will only be able to use very little to block this. So early in the game, that's just such a powerful hit.
And with Bravo, there's always the threat of pummel. As you can see, he's representing 2 open resources and 2 cards in hand. So if he doesn't have the pummel, he's certainly double-representing it. And I imagine that'll be a play we'll see throughout the course of the game.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, Joe double-checking his arsenal, double-checking the cards in his hand, trying to see what he can do to try and mitigate this damage, on top of making sure he has a solid turn if that pummel does throw in.
Yeah, and one difficult part with Levi is the sense that you're really trying to kind of groom your graveyard to be that whenever you're playing one of these big blood deck cards, you're minimizing the blood deck damage.
Yeah, and over here we do have that pummel. It looks like Joe chose not to block with a card from hand. If he did block with a card on top of the pummel, that would be 2 more cards in the graveyard, giving him that 3 magic number Levi likes to see. Instead, it looks like he's only going to be discarding the 1 card, so we'll have to see what he's got in mind for next turn.
Yeah, it definitely could be either way. I mean, Joe could just be looking at his hand and realizing that he may not have enough to play a strong 2-card hand with Leviah, or maybe he kind of sniffed out the pummel.
Oh, and over here we do have an immovable red coming from hand, so this is going to stop 7 of those 14 damage, but it still won't prevent that discard on hit.
Yeah, I mean, and for Joe, this is a fine play. He he's prevented a bunch of damage, and he has 2 cards, he had netted 2 cards to the graveyard, and Levi can play a fine 1-turn hand and get a swing with claws, chip for 3 damage, and then when you get the life totals after that, it will be 36 to 30 or 34 to 33, and considering how strong that turn was out of Bravo, that's not a bad spot for Joe to be in.
Yeah, do you think as the Bravo player, you're going to be doing a lot of just taking Levia's hits, assuming that you can dish out more? Or do you think that the Shadow Brute is able to deal more damage in an average turn than the Bravo?
Honestly, during the course of the game, I think the Leviathan has one of the highest output for damages for any hero in Flesh and Blood right now. Just the amount of raw damage and the resources it takes to get there. So I imagine we're going to see the Bravo doing exactly this, trying to dominate attacks and really rip cards from Leviathan before she's able to really start, getting off these strong attack turns.
Yeah, though here we do have a second big Bravo. This is a dominated crippling crush. So the last one came in for 11, or for 10 before the pummel. This one's coming in for 11 with the on-hit discard crush effect. A very, very powerful start for Bravo Showstopper. Right now, we are not seeing any resources floating, though, so even if that face-down card in Arsenal is a pummel, I think it's only going to be 2 cards from the crush effect that could possibly be discarded here.
Yeah, and the crippling crush is just it's one of the best specialization cards for any hero. Just the powerful on hit with the crush effect, and we're gonna see Joe eat all that damage.
Yeah, sometimes you just want to keep the cards in your hand, hope that those discarded cards are not the ones that you want, and we'll see if Joe can still have a powerful turn coming up, losing a Howl from Beyond and a Unworldly Bellow. So none of those actually attack action cards, probably what Joe is looking to see get pulled away.
Yeah, and a card like Howl from Beyond is fantastic in Leviathan. If you're banishing cards from your graveyard naturally, so that kind of gives you a little bit of recursion there. So Joe definitely has the way over 3, and with the ability to have Howl flip to your arsenal or flip to your banish zone, that can incentivize Joe to fire off a big Blood Debt attack.
Yeah, the only risk that Joe has right now, though, is that out of the 5 cards in his discard pile, at least 4 of those are not attack action cards, and they're not going to have 6 or more power. I can't remember what the 5th card is. But yeah, right now, these 3 cards going in, they're not going to turn off Blood Debt. And so this Howl from Beyond is going to hurt Joe next turn unless he ends up playing it or something else to turn off the Blood Debt with Levi's ability.
Well, the Howl from Beyond is going to go to the graveyard, so he doesn't have to worry about Blood Debt damage as of yet.
Well, if he plays it.
Would, yeah.
But Dread Screamer's Go Again wasn't triggered there.
Correct.
Yeah, so end of turn, Joe took that 1 Blood Debt. Looks like Nick did eat a lot of damage there, though he did still block with the Spinal Crush. Spinal Crush, the 5 for 9, stops Go Again. Go Again isn't as much what you see in Leviathan, but it's still something that can happen with the claws, but not with the Scabskin Leathers.
Yeah, and it looks as if we're setting up for a Bravo turn here. He's going to go with Belting and then Anathos. So I mean, Joe is definitely looking at this, and this is representing a lot of damage. It's going to be 11 damage from the Bravo player here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 11 damage coming in. Joe at 16 before the Anthos for 6. And Joe just double checking all of those options once again. Is he going to be able to have a strong turn? He has now 2 attack action cards, I believe, out of the 3 cards in his graveyard. So if he does banish, that will prevent the Blood Debt. If he has a Dread Screamer, that'll give it Go Again. It'll give his other things the boosts that they require. But is it potentially too little too late at this point? We'll see how much he decides to block this. 6 attack, he's at 16 right now. The Bravo player is at 31. It's a bit of a deficit right now, or a difference.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, Bravo just got off such a strong start early in the game with being able to fire the Thunderquake, then followed by Crippling Crush, and then even the Zealth Belting Anathos. So that's a very strong first 3 turns.
Yeah, it looks like Joe is playing that Howl from Beyond, giving his next attack +3, a card that we definitely see a lot in these Shadow Hero builds, and he's following it with the Boneyard Marauder, which is just going to be that 6 for 1, so pretty efficient, getting the Howl from Beyond and the Boneyard Marauder, just pitching a single blue. And because Dread Screamer's going in, that will activate Levi's ability, so these 3 cards of Blood Debt are not going to hurt Joe this turn.
Yeah, and Joe is really hoping to see that Howl from Beyond banished there too. That would allow him basically to set up the same thing for the following turn of just playing the Howl, playing a big attack, and then coming back and trying to mitigate that blood Debt damage again.
Yeah, that's one of the fun things that Levia can do is that recursion. It's a bit more than with a hero like Chain, where if you want to get your Howl from Beyond's back, you have to play in Unhallowed Rites. Levia just sort of does it naturally. She takes cards from the graveyard, puts them in the Banish Zone. And so when you get the cards that can be played out of the Banish Zone, you get to play those over and over again.
We're gonna see Joe get an equipment block out of the Bravo player possibly here. Bravo's still very high on life, so it's definitely interesting to see. In thinking about committing equipment this early, the one thing about Levia generally, though, Levia is usually just pushing raw damage. There's not many on hits in that deck. I mean, maybe there might be a CNC, but that's really the only on hit I can think of.
Yeah, CNC or potentially a pummel, though we don't usually see too many of those in my experience. And here we have Bravo coming in with his ability again, getting that Dominate. And we got another Thunderquake coming in, so that's going to be 10 Dominate. No potential for a pummel coming in because Nick's hand is empty, his arsenal is empty. But 10 damage when you're at 16, dominated, is definitely something you don't want to be seeing if you're in Joe's seat.
Especially with Levia, knowing that whenever you block with cards out of hand, that effectively hurts your chances of being able to get, that blood debt triggered off of Levia. So you're really in a position where you're kind of forced to keep cards in hand that you may not want to, just to be able to ensure you don't take extra damage from blood debt.
All right, and fortunately for Joe, he's got his second red unmovable coming in. Out of his arsenal right there. So that's going to be blocking for 8 out of 10.
That's a timely unmovable for Joe to soak up a lot of that damage.
Yeah, unmovable, one of those cards that I think we started seeing people really include, thanks to Bravo Star of the Show, finding its use still against other heroes like the OG Bravo. Oh, and it looks like Joe burning his gambler's gloves to try and get another action point after rolling a 1 to Scabskins.
I'm going to switch the dice out to see if that makes a difference.
Yeah, so there he got a 4. Once again, half of 4, 2, giving him 2 action points instead of none. Definitely the best scenario you have for Gambler's Gloves is switching that that roll of a 1 into more than 1. And we'll see what Joe ends up doing with these 2 actions. Hungering Slaughter Beast, this is just a 3 for 2. Takes 3 cards out of the graveyard. It should be enough to turn off. Yep, we got that Wrecker Romp right there, turning off Blood Debt for the turn. There's no trigger on this one if there is something bigger. Some of the cards like this Boneyard Marauder at the top of the graveyard. Oh no, that one doesn't have it either. There are definitely some that'll get Go Again, like the Dread Screamer, or get a plus bonus. I think Endless Maw might do that. But
Endless Maw is one of the ones. One of the ones that pushes a lot of damage to Endless Maw. We'll get a +3 buff on top of just being a strongly statted attack. The Hungering Slaughter Beast, Boneyard Marauder, a lot of those cards, that's just raw damage. And I mean, and Joe having 2 action points to spend this turn and throwing a Hungering Slaughter Beast with the first one, it's looking strong. He has 1 resource floating in the card in hand, so definitely interested to see what else may come out here. And he does have the Tunic resource available also.
Yeah, we are seeing a 2-card block from Nick, so signaling that he doesn't really have, he's not going to be dominating and a big attack next turn. Let's see what Joe ends up throwing as his second action.
A lot of Levia cards can play well off of 1 or 2 resources, so having the active Tunic, that opens up a lot of play lines for Joe.
Yeah, Joe put his cursor over Ebb and Fold. This is one of those equipment that you don't often see too much. It basically lets you banish a card to draw a card. If it's a shadow card. But instead he's just playing Ghostly Visit Raw here. This is another one of those cards that could recurse out of the Banish Zone, but if nothing else right now, it's just 4 for 1. On top of the 6, that's a 10 damage turn. And it looks like Nick will be using 2 of his equipment to block that. Still, so much life, 25 to 14, and the Skullcap untouched, Ironhide Legs untouched, and 1 block each left on the Plating and the Fist.
Yeah, Nick could just be using this as like a setup turn. Just, absorb the Scab Skin roll, mitigate his damage loss, and just, swing with an Anathos and possibly just try to fire back an attack.
Yeah, it looks like we do have Showtime. This is a Bravo specialization. Didn't see too much play in Bravo Star of the Show, but in Bravo Showstopper, it basically gives you an extra card next turn, and it gives you the card of your choice that you get to put into your arsenal, unless he does choose to keep it in hand for some reason. But yeah, that Crippling Crush going into arsenal, and at the beginning of his next turn, he will be drawing an extra card, giving him basically the 6-card hand.
Yeah, I mean, you have to figure Nick is going for the kill shot here. This is probably Joe's going to have to find a way to rip some of those cards out of his hand in order to be able to mitigate that, that Crippling Crush that he knows is going to be coming his way next turn.
Yeah, we've seen 2 red unmovables, likely a third one in the deck somewhere. Whether or not it's in Joe's hand, we do not know. Joe has right now, it looks like 4 cards with Blood Debt banished. So if he doesn't end up doing something active to put another card into his banish zone with 6 attack, he'll be taking 4 damage, bringing him down to 10. Oh.
And this is how Joe can bail himself out of this situation. Blood Rush Bellow is one of the strongest brute cards that are out there right now, and this could lead to a pretty crazy turn for Joe.
Yeah, we do see a Shadow of Blasphemit going into the graveyard. That means that Joe gets an extra action point. Or rather, this has Go again, and Joe gets 2 more cards. So he has 3 cards in hand. All of his brute attacks getting +2. Will that be enough for him to take enough cards out of Nick's hand to prevent a dominated Crippling Crush?
Yeah, this is one of the things I know. This doesn't happen as much in Levia, or as it does in Brute, but the Mandible Claws are also turned on. So they're going to be, those are, 5 for 2 with Go again on both of those. So really the main question Joe has is, does he have enough resources to be able to push this big turn, or did he draw a hand of all reds?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll see what he ends up choosing to do. Looks like he is coming in with one of those Mandible Claws. This is going to be for 5, and it will have Go again, thanks to Blood Rush Bellow and the discard.
I mean, with knowing that Crippling Crush is an arsenal, it's hard to imagine that the Bravo player is going to really be blocking a lot this turn. So I think Joe's going to be able to get a lot of damage over.
Yeah, that 5 damage, not blocked, brings Nick down to 20. Joe looks like he might want to come in with those second claws. Trying to figure out the best way to pay for it, I think. Yeah, pitching an Art of War here. Definitely a powerful card if you're looking to get stuff into your banner zone, draw cards, give things a boost. I guess because he's using his claws instead of attack action cards, he's choosing not to play that Art of War and to just use on the stuff that he knows he can rely on. And here we do have that Writhing Beast Hulk. This is the one that will give Dominate if one of the cards banished has 6 or more attack. And oh, it looks like none of those cards do have 6 or more attack. So it will just...
And honestly, that may not be the worst thing for Joe. I think he's in a position he really wants to rip cards out of his opponent's hand. So by giving his opponent the chance to throw more cards in front of it, I think that definitely bodes well to maybe mitigate that big turn coming up.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong though, but Joe hasn't taken a card with 6 or more attack into his banish zone this turn, right? So Levia is not preventing the 5
he may
blood
not
die.
have. Oh no. Yeah, that could definitely be.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why Levia may not be as relevant in the top tier meta. People like to have decks that can consistently perform well and that don't have very many random effects that you can't control. With a deck like Rhinar or even Levia, sometimes you can attempt to plan it so that you have very few cards that don't prevent the blood debt and that you can play them every turn, but sometimes you do have these random elements, and I think they're more random and more punishing in Levia than you get in Rhinar, where if you're not doing that specific thing every turn that takes cards, what you're going to get is a penalty from that power.
And we see Nick here trying to line up the best blocks that he can. Yeah, especially if there is that blood debt is not turned off this turn. Eventually, all he has to really do is just hang on this turn and be able to throw a big attack at Joe next time.
Yeah, it looks like the the Blood Debt will bring Joe down to 9. Nick is also down to 9. But there is a Crippling Crush, Dominated, potentially Pummeled, potentially Tear Asunder maybe. I'm not sure if Bravo runs that nowadays. Yeah. So, and Nick has that extra card in his hand coming from Bravo's activation. So 6 cards.
Yeah, definitely a tough spot for Joe. You have to expect you're going to be facing down a dominated Crippling Crush here. So he does have the Scab Skins and the Tunic that he can throw in front of it to prevent 3 of that damage. But it's highly likely Joe's going to end up losing a couple cards from hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on top of that, we do know that Nick is running Zealous Belting, so there is a possibility of having a Zealous Belting into that Crippling Crush. I think there's enough cards in his hand to make that happen. Maybe not dominated all the way, but I think Bravo Showstopper is going to just be presenting more damage than Levia over the course of this turn.
And of course, Pummel being the ever-present threat when you're facing down a Guardian deck. Highly likely that, out of 5 cards, and really effectively a 6-card hand, he could very well have one of the copies of Pummel in his deck also.
Yeah, right now I think we've only seen red Pummels, unless I missed it. So I'm not sure how many he is running. Here we have a fun one. This is Rouse the Ancients, another that can get Dominate, and it's being triggered by Pulverize, which has 14 attack, which would give this a 7 go again.
Well, it's definitely interesting. A 7 go again is a pretty strong. Knowing Pulverize is in his hand, I wonder if he has enough resources to be able to play that Crippling Crush.
I don't know if he would necessarily have played the Rouse the Ancients if he couldn't, or he's just saving it for later. But if so, he's presenting at least 7 plus if he goes for Anthos. Anthos isn't turned on right now. Oh, yes, it is. Yeah, so Anthos would be 6 plus 7. That's 13 damage minimum. If he's able to get one of his attacks that deals more than that, that's more than 13. Joe taking 2 cards out of his hand right now, blocking 6 of these. Looks like he's still got his hand over there making up his mind.
And this effectively, it could represent the same thing as a Crippling Crush. I mean, if he does have the resource to play the Crippling Crush and he fires it off, I mean, at that point, Joe's going to have to block with both cards from his hand anyway to not die. So it definitely is, he's going to be in a spot, and he'll be taking Blood Debt damage next turn anyway. And this is kind of the trap Levia falls in. If Levia falls behind like this, it definitely can be in situations where, like, she's just stuck. But it looks like he does have the resources to play that Crippling Crush.
Yeah, Crippling Crush coming in. This is 7 plus 11 this turn. That's 18 damage. Joe has 9 life. He's got 3 block and equipment and 2 cards in hand. So there's a chance that he can not die, but I don't know if he'll be able to then prevent the Blood Debt and survive his next turn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely doesn't look too good for Joe here with facing down a Crippling Crush and knowing that it's not even the Crippling Crush damage, but it's also you have a bunch of Blood Debt stacked up that it's going to definitely ping you at the end of your next turn.
All right, and it looks like Joe is blocking with all of his options. That's 6, 7, 8, 9 into that 11, so only taking 2 damage. Not getting the crush effect, which doesn't really matter having an empty hand, but at this point he's not going to be able to stop the 5 damage of Blood Debt that's going to be coming in, bringing him down to 1.
And I think we're seeing here a lot of the reasons why, like, Levia is a pretty tough deck to play into this meta. This meta is a very fast, aggressive meta, and just being able to, have that one big turn from by your opponent that strips your hand, and then have to eat additional damage. That's definitely a tough spot for that hero to be in.
Yeah, so Nick right now just has to eke 1 damage over. Looks like he's using Bravo's ability to dominate, and then just coming in with a Spinal Crush, 9 dominate, unless Joe magically has a defense reaction that doesn't exist. Yeah, it looks like that's going to be the concession right there.
Yeah, and that was a strong showing by Bravo. He strung together some fantastic turns beginning of the game, just with the Thunderquake followed by the Crippling. It was, Joe was. I don't think there was ever a point in this game Joe wasn't on his back foot.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks, Larry, for helping commentate this game with me. Thank you, all these, for the viewers. I think we had 13 over the course of this stream, so pretty nice for something this late on a Friday night and last minute. We're going to have one more game in this series, where that's going to be tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern, I believe. So it looks like the players right now just talking about what might have happened after the fact.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you, Larry. Hopefully you all end up having a good rest of your evening and a good weekend, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Goodbye. Oh, I forgot to mention that the